Uh, Thank you very much to NAVITAS for inviting me to come and speak to you today. And we're going to cover a number of topics, study permits, visas, and really to add to this is COVID-19 has kind of facilitated some things, but made other things a little bit more complicated, especially due to the travel restrictions. Just a minute. Just a minute. Oh, there we go. So anyways, I want to congratulate you on your choice of Canadian education. I think that Canada delivers a world-class education. So congratulations on giving consideration to what Canada has to offer. I do want to talk a little bit about the information I'm going to provide is good. However, it's a little bit like when you're dealing with your clients. Each person is unique. Each situation is unique. Therefore, I think when you're working with people, you really have to kind of take a look at what are their individual circumstances, what's their profile, what's their intent. So you can't really use a cookie cutter approach to really even the visa process. When you're applying for something, you need to treat everyone a little bit differently and make sure that you're covering every aspect. So this is why I also say that in the absence of really a one-on-one consultation with someone, it's very difficult to see if there are any aggravating circumstances in their profile that you need to try to mitigate. First thing I would like to talk about is immigration legislation. And immigration programs and policies are kind of, you really need to be familiar with them. Another thing too is that officers have a tremendous amount of discretion. The way that the legislation is written and a lot of the jurisprudence that exists, pretty well officers, if they are not satisfied that someone meets the requirements, they can refuse. And if they are, they can facilitate, which explains, I think, in some cases, why you may have a client with an identical set of circumstances where their application is approved. And then in other cases, you have another person where their application would be the exact same details. So legislation and the policies and programs can be quite complex, and they're always changing. And add to that COVID, so it makes the environment extremely dynamic, involving many details. So as I've mentioned, navigating the process with COVID-19 can be a bit of a challenge. The first thing I would encourage you to do is to really become familiar with the information that you find online on the CIC website, so cic.gc.ca. And if you take a look at the most requested, as you can tell here, when we're talking with COVID-19, they're going to talk a lot about the travel restrictions, the exemptions, also the fact that a lot of individuals who need to come to Canada will also need the Arrive Can mobile app. There's a wealth of information here. So I strongly encourage you to become familiar with the information that's outlined on the website. In particular, as you can see here, there's going to be a lot of information dealing with visitors. For the most part, when we're talking about visitor visas, at this particular point in time, there are a lot of travel restrictions. Really, people just seeking to come and travel to Canada to visit at this point in time would not be permitted to do so. They can be accompanying family members, and this is where you, I think, need to be a little bit familiar with what their policies are. They do talk about temporary workers and essential sectors. And of course, international students, this is really the reason why it's extremely important. If you want somebody to come and study, pre-COVID, there may have been circumstances where individuals would have been able to commence a program of studies of less than 6 months and then applied for a study permit from within Canada. But at the moment, really, if someone is seeking to study in Canada, they're really going to have to apply for the visa. So as you can see here on the website, there is a lot of information. I don't want to go in too much detail in here, but essentially, if someone is seeking to travel to Canada, they are going to need to apply for a study permit and meet the requirements. Another aspect of this is an individual seeking to come and study in Canada is actually going to have to attend a designated learning institution that has a COVID-19 readiness plan. So the department has been quite strict. They want to make sure that everyone meets those requirements. And you can go on the website and see whether or not an institution in fact has a designated, they are a designated learning institution, but more importantly, that they have a COVID-19 readiness plan for their students arriving to Canada to commence their program. Another thing too that you need to be aware of is that above and beyond just those normal restrictions that the department has implemented, the Department of Immigration, the Public Health Agency of Canada can also implement restrictions, and Transport Canada as well can also implement restrictions. And those can change with a very rapid or very little notice. So you need to be aware of this. At the moment, there are travel restrictions from India. Those from Pakistan have just recently been lifted. However, they still do need to meet those mandatory quarantine measures and protocols that they've established for students seeking to arrive. So as you can see, at the moment, there are only 4 major airports that individuals can actually fly to as part of their those travel restrictions that have been implemented. So you have Calgary International, Montreal, Pierre-Elliott Trudeau Airport, Toronto Pearson, and Vancouver. So we're not too sure exactly when the airports will be expanded, where other students will be to arrive in Winnipeg or other airports. But I would say that as the numbers start to go down, that we're going to start to see things opening up. There is at the moment a mandatory 3-night hotel stay. There's going to be a pre-boarding test. Once they've arrived in Canada, they're also going to need to have another COVID test to ensure that they can take their domestic flight for onwards travel. So what's very important if you're organizing a travel itinerary for a student is the fact that they will not be able to travel from the destination airport to their intended destination. In other words, if they're flying into Toronto, they're going to need to self-isolate in Toronto for 3 days before they can embark on a domestic flight onwards to Winnipeg. So if you've actually set it up on the same day, there are going to be significant challenges and they're going to miss their flight, essentially, is I guess what I'm saying. Another thing is, even pre-COVID, the Canada Border Services Agency has actually implemented entry and exit controls. Many countries have entry and exit controls, but I would say for Canada, this is fairly new. Perhaps on entry had always fairly good controls on that, but the exit, that would be something that was implemented in the summer of 2020. And actually, before an individual actually arrives in Canada, the Canada Border Services Agency is actually doing pre-clearances. So they're actually verifying the information on the traveler. What is their intent for travel to Canada? So the CBSA officer has a fairly good idea of the background information on this individual before they arrive at their destination in Canada. Now, as far as the type of information they collect, they would have their name, their date of birth, nationality, sex, document type, what are they coming to study? Are they coming here to work? Are they an accompanying dependent? And essentially the country that's issued the travel document. As far as exit information, it's pretty well the same information. I think a lot of this is linked for a number purposes. What is the purpose for somebody's temporary residence in Canada? But also Canada also has residency obligations. So an individual who is a permanent resident of Canada has to meet their residency obligations in order to remain a permanent resident of Canada. Now, as far as applying for a study permit, the Department of Immigration had kind of made the promise that if an individual had submitted a complete application prior to May 15th of 2021, that they should have a decision by the beginning of August in order to attend the fall semester. What they've indicated is anybody applying after this date, they'll make attempts to essentially process the application as quickly as possible. However, they weren't able to guarantee a decision. With COVID-19, I would have to say that their processing times have been kind of unpredictable, and they're kind of all over the map. You have a number of diplomatic missions across the world, but due to the fact that a lot of these applications are submitted online, they can pretty well process it anywhere. So it's not unusual for an application submitted, we'll say, in Jordan, to even be processed in Hong Kong or Los Angeles. And I think they call this leveraging the network. They try to essentially redistribute work to where they have the capacity to process it in a timely manner. But for the most part, they do prefer that it be processed at the mission responsible. Now, where do you get the information? Essentially on the website, but also if you're wanting to submit an online application, you would start with a CIC account. So you'll have to register a My CIC account. And as you can see here, these are the most requested pieces of information that individuals are trying to seek on their, as far as services. So as you can see, you go to the website, cic.gc.ca. You can sign in or create an account to apply online. And I strongly recommend that you do so. Submitting a paper-based application, especially with COVID-19, I would say that the processing times are going to be extremely lengthy. A lot of Canadian-based officers working a number of diplomatic missions abroad have been repatriated to Canada, as well as their family members. So essentially, I think paper-based applications are seeing significant delays as a result of COVID. You're also able to apply, to check application status. So you can check processing times. And you can also find out whether you require an electronic travel authorization or visa in order to travel to Canada. You can also find a number of application forms and packages online as well. So as I mentioned, currently anyone seeking a study in Canada must apply for a study permit prior to being able to move onwards and travel to Canada to commence their program of studies. Essentially, there are circumstances as well if accompanying family members can also join you to come and accompany you while you're pursuing your program of study. And usually these are immediate family members. So immediate family members are usually the applicant, their spouse or common law partner, and their dependent children. It does not extend, to aunt, uncle, first cousin, and things like this. And then, as I mentioned, they also would need to attend an institution that has a readiness plan in place. If the student is already in Canada, they may also require written authorization from the Department of Immigration in order to travel to Canada. Now, one of the benefits of studying in Canada is also having the ability potentially to work on campus. If a student is studying full-time, they would be able to work on campus at the institution at which they are enrolled and attending full-time. Usually the work component, the individual could only commence working in Canada once they've actually started their program of studies. And in certain circumstances, if they're full-time, And the program leads to a degree, diploma, certificate, is academic, technical, or vocational training program. They may also be able to work off campus. Now, when the study permit is issued, you would see these in the conditions. So if there's a condition that they're not permitted to do so, they'll probably have difficulty in obtaining a social insurance number. So not only must it be indicated on their study permit, but they also have to have the ability to obtain a social insurance number so that the employer can actually pay them. There are also some programs where a co-op component is a requirement of their program of studies. And if a student is essentially attending school full-time at a designated learning institution, that's a university or college, the spouse or common law partner may also have the ability to work in Canada on an open work permit. And then, of course, once someone has graduated, if they're in a postgraduate work permit eligible program, they'd be able to apply for a postgraduate work permit. So as I indicated, really the aspect of being able to apply for the postgraduate work permit is linked to Canada trying to be competitive on the world stage and attracting international students. So I think if someone is aspiring to becoming a permanent resident or potentially even a Canadian citizen, the ability to start working is a very strong component of that immigration strategy. So I think a lot of the magic occurs once the individual has graduated from a program of study and starts working in Canada. And if you look at a lot of immigration streams, be it a provincial nominee program or be it express entry under the Canadian Experience Class, that ability to start working is really an important component. I would say that the study to work to permanent residency stream is one of the strongest permanent residence strategies that an individual can actually pursue. Now, a component as well that's extremely important is also the ability to be able to submit biometrics. So if someone has never actually submitted biometrics in the past, they've never applied for a visitor visa or a study permit or work permit, they're going to need to submit biometrics as a part of the process. So with COVID-19, that's sometimes been a little bit challenging in being able to find out which particular institutions or countries actually have visa application centers that are open. So essentially, you can go to the website, you can find a visa application center that serves your country of origin to determine whether or not they're open. And I would essentially encourage you to do so. For example, applicants from Mexico were essentially facing a challenge in being able to provide their biometrics for the longest time. Biometrics so that the process continue, because until they're approved for travel to Canada. So it's extremely important. Mexico is open at the time due to COVID-19. So some applicants were having to go to places like Costa Rica or some other country in order to provide their biometrics. So it can make things a little bit challenging at times. Another thing as well, I did mention that online applications is definitely the way to go. So in order to submit an online application, what's extremely important is that the individual create a Government of Canada key. Now, a Government of Canada key can only be created if you're 16 years of age or older. If the individual is a minor, it'd probably be an adult that would need to create it. Or if an individual has a bank in Canada, they can also use a sign-in partner to create an account. So that's an important piece. You need to start with the Government of Canada key and then My CIC account. Now, with respect to the use of representatives, what's very important is if you create a Government of Canada key and a CIC account, authorized representatives do not require an individual's account in order to submit an application. So essentially, as far as using authorized representatives, what's very important is if someone is using an unauthorized representative, that could have a negative effect on their application. If the Department of Immigration is aware that there is an unauthorized representative that's using that. And another thing too, if someone is using an unauthorized representative and that individual is involved in activities that may not be acceptable to the Department of Immigration, such as misrepresentation or fraud, things like that, that can also have a negative effect on the applicant. Even though the applicant, there's really nothing wrong with them. You know, they're a good candidate, they're a good student, they have a good documentation, but if they suspect that someone is using an unauthorized representative, that could have a negative effect. So authorized reps, pretty well lawyers or paralegals or notaries in good standing, or regulated Canadian immigration consultants. Another key piece of information that an individual is going to need to submit their application is a passport. What's very important is the passport should be for the longest period possible to carry the individual through their journey. The reason for that is immigration legislation dictates that they're not able to issue a document, a permit, beyond the validity period of their current and subsisting passport. That's by way of regulation. If they're making an exception, pretty well the only way they can do that is by issuing a temporary resident permit. There are circumstances where individuals may not have a valid travel document, but they have a good profile, and the visa officer feels that it's warranted. They are of the opinion that it's warranted to issue that. But essentially, when we're looking at a passport, it is a mandatory document for the most part. The temporary resident permit is dealing with exceptions, where in the opinion of the visa officer, it would be warranted. So something that I really recommend that you do is when you're uploading the passport, that you upload the biodata page, and also to include other documents that provide a bit of a story. In some cases, if you look at the visa office specific instructions, they're going to ask you to provide documentation as to your previous travel to Canada or other countries. They may also want visas or permits essentially indicating that you have valid status in your current country of residence. That you often see that in the Gulf, where individuals are essentially, we'll say, perhaps an Indian national, Pakistani national, but they are permanent residents or residents in another country working, and it would be very important to include those documents as well. So provide previous proof of previous international travel. And more importantly, really what you're trying to show is that the student has traveled abroad and that they have a history of compliance, that they've followed the rules of immigration of that country. And that this is very important. This carries a lot of weight for visa officers, whether or not a person has previously complied with the directions or rules of that country. So it's very important. And another thing that's very important is to not take for granted that the visa officer knows who you are. They're essentially going to assess the information on face value. They're going to take a look at what you've provided, and they sometimes will say that really the onus of proof is on the applicant. It's not on the visa officer having to extract information to see whether or not you meet the requirements. Visa officers have a tremendous amount of work. They have very heavy workloads, and they don't always have the time to be able to do a forensic analysis of what you've provided and seek additional information. I would say that's really the exception. If they're asking you for additional information, they're giving you a chance, but I would say that is rare. In most cases, they will assess it based on what you've provided. Another document that you need to provide is a digital photograph when you submit the application. And really what they're looking for, there are paper-based applications where they need to meet certain size requirements, but really what they're looking for is they're looking for a photograph of an individual where the individual is square to the camera with a neutral expression with a white background. So when you essentially provide this digital photograph, it should be the way that it appears to the far left-hand side. And essentially, if it is not, they may not feel that that meets the requirements. Another thing is that you're going to need a credit card to pay applicable fees, IRCC fees, and they accept a number of products, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, but you do need a credit card. There are some cases where individuals can't really use a lending document or loaning document. Therefore, you may want to see whether a provider also allows you to purchase a card and load money on it if that is a challenge for you. So as I mentioned, to study in Canada as an international student, those that have been submitted prior to May 15th should be processed in time. Those after may not meet those requirements. It's extremely important as well. There are some countries that will tell you, like for example, if you're submitting an application to the mission in Senegal, Dakar, they will tell you that you need to submit your application before such and such a date. Otherwise, the application may not be processed in time. They will actually refuse applications in certain circumstances because the guide tells you, if you don't apply by, we'll say the 15th of July, they could refuse the application because it was not submitted in a timely manner. So pay attention to those timelines in the guide if you're seeing timelines. Also take a look at the processing times for study permits outside of Canada. Right now, what's being published is that most study permits should be processed within 8 weeks. However, that does not take into consideration the submission of biometrics. It also does not take into consideration the amount of time it would take you to submit the passport upon approval of the application to the visa application center so that they can send it onwards to the Canadian visa section to affix a visa in the passport itself. As far as preparing to study in Canada, I also ask people become very familiar with what the requirements of the institution are. And you can also find that information on the CIC website in some cases, or more importantly, the institution's website to determine what the requirements are. As far as the student direct stream, some of you may be wondering, like, who can apply for this? Really, the way that it's linked is that eligibility requirements for the student direct stream apply for individuals who are legally residing in these countries. So namely China, India, Morocco, Pakistan, the Philippines, Senegal, and Vietnam. So it doesn't mean a Vietnamese national living in the US can apply under the student direct stream. Individuals must be legally residing in one of these countries in order to apply. Another thing is that the student direct stream is not a guarantee that the application will be approved. You still need to meet the basic eligibility requirements. If an individual doesn't meet the basic eligibility requirements, the application still can be refused, even though the individual has provided all required documentation required under the student direct stream. So that's also extremely important. Now, we did talk a little bit about, designated learning institutions. Another thing is, for the most part, if individuals are seeking to study in Canada, in my opinion, it's usually stronger if you are applying to an institution that would lead to a degree, diploma, or certificate. Language schools, in many cases, you can apply to at a language school, but a lot of programs are less than 6 months. So even the way the legislation is written, it tells you that if you were able to legally travel to Canada and your program of study would be completed within 6 months, upon entry to Canada, you may not need a study permit. But at this point, you would actually need to apply for a study permit due to COVID. I think it's always stronger if you're essentially seeking to obtain a degree, diploma, or certificate. So language studies are good, but you would need to explain why you're actually coming to Canada to pursue a program of studies. And you would also need to probably show that you've made efforts as well in your own country in order to improve your language skills, or if you're not able to do so, that would be an important part. So as we indicated, in order to obtain a study permit, you need to apply to a designated learning institution. They are listed on the CIC website. Another thing as well is the Government of Canada does not pay for health insurance. So it's very important that you attend an institution that has a health insurance policy, and that is a requirement with the NAVITAS institutions. So if you go to the website, there is going to be some information, pre-departure guide for international students, give you a bit of an idea of what it costs to study in Canada, become familiar with that, and also the application process. Now, rule of thumb is essentially you absolutely need the bare minimum to pay your tuition in full for 1 year in your program of studies. You would also need enough money to support yourself for a year. So the rule of thumb, I would say, is full payment of tuition, a minimum of about $12,000 for the principal applicant. If they have other accompanying family members with them, that would of course increase the cost. So the visa officer would want to see a little bit more money, I think, if you were coming with your immediate family members. And as you can see here, the department is definitely indicating to new applicants that they are encouraged to apply online, especially with COVID-19. If you're applying under the student direct stream, I guess the promise is that they would process the application faster, it's more streamlined, but individuals would also need to apply online for this particular stream. Applying on paper, okay. Even though you're applying online, I always tell people it's extremely important to become familiar with what the requirements of that local visa office are. A lot of people don't know that. They go to the website, they take a look, what documentation do I need? They create a list, once they've created their online application, which indicates what documents that they need to upload. But each country has their own requirements. Each diplomatic mission will have their own local instructions, and I really encourage people to become familiar with this. It gives you a bit of an idea of what they're looking for. So, for example, I've gone to the paper-based application here for Pakistani nationals applying for a study permit in Canada. As you can see, they have a guide. And as you can see here, they're going to talk about documents that they're looking for on their study permit. But in particular in here, they also want a study plan. So that's your clue that if you're going to submit a study permit for an individual from Pakistan or to the diplomatic mission in Abu Dhabi, it's important to include those instructions. So essentially, they're going to provide you with a list of documents that you want. And as you can see here, if you are essentially living in the Gulf, They're also going to want a copy of your most recent Gulf residency visa. And you should include a copy of that with a biodata page of your passport. So this is your clue that if you're not submitting this and you're living in the Gulf, that can be a basis for refusal. That visa officer may look at it and say, I'm not satisfied the individual would meet the requirements, or I have no proof of compliance that they've actually complied with the rules in their current country of residence. So now I'm going to look at another guide here. In this case, we have a Jordan national wanting to apply for a study permit, and they're going to have a document checklist of documents that they're looking for, and they have their own visa guide as well. And as you can see, the mission in Amman, what's important to them is your travel history. They want to know where you've been. So this is a form here to show pretty well what countries that you visited, where have you lived for the past 10 years, from what date to what date, what was your purpose. So in the documentation that you provide, it's important that you provide this story as well, because it's important to the visa officers processing applications for residents in that particular country. So it's important that you provide that documentation. Otherwise, you may risk a refusal of your study permit. So some rules of thumb on study permits. Extremely important that you provide credible information. You have to be truthful. Also, if you're writing a cover letter, it's important that you be respectful. The visa officer is squarely in control. I mean, you could provide the documentation in a factual manner, but be careful of the tone, be careful of your words. Another thing as well is try to organize the application in such a way that the officer can quickly make a decision. Be succinct, get right to the point as to what you're trying to communicate to the visa officer. Visa officers have a tremendous amount of work. I remember showing up for work at the mission, and I would have 100 applications on my desk. It wasn't a question of, well, get through whatever you can. It was, you have 100 applications to process today. You've got to get through it. So be mindful of that you can't provide detail that really provides no value, because they have very large workloads. And if you're making it difficult for them to make the decision, or if they're always having to ask the applicant for additional information, they're going to simply refuse the application. Another thing is to not dwell on the past. If you've had a previous refusal, of course, you're going to need to disclose that you were refused, and you can do that on the application itself. But don't focus in your cover letter on the previous refusal and trying to defend why that application should have been approved. Remember, this is a new application with a new officer, for the most part, we would expect, processing the application. So deal with it as if it were a new application, a new opportunity to get an approval of that application. Another thing is, don't assume that the visa officer or the decision maker understands the culture or knows who you are or your social standing. You may be famous in your country of origin. You may be, I don't know, a famous artist or movie star or tennis player. They're not going to know that. So when you prepare the application, even though you may be someone who's famous and in your country you have a very good social standing, don't assume that the visa officer knows who you are. They don't. They're going to make a decision based on the information that you provide them. So if you've previously applied to travel to Canada and you have traveled to Canada, don't just complete the application on the basis that they really know who you are. They're not going to go back and take a look at all previous applications that you've submitted unless they have concerns of fraud. But don't take it for account that they really know who you are. So prepare it, pay attention to detail. Another thing as well, a little bit about the be truthful. If they catch you in a lie, or if you've provided information to question your credibility, this can result in a 5-year ban from Canada. due to misrepresentation. So pay very close attention to the background declaration questions on the application form itself. Now, if a student was previously refused a visa, permit, or denied entry to Canada, but in particular here, pay attention to this, or any other country, such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Schengen visa, Europe, you have to mention that that you've been previously refused. The Canadian Embassy has a memorandum of understanding with the United States. It's been in existence for a number of years. They talk to each other. It's as easy as a phone call. The same thing with Australia or the UK. They have memorandums of understanding. They share information between each other. So if you've lied on your application saying, well, yeah, I was refused a US visa, they're probably not going to find out. Well, I would argue that they probably will. If they have any doubts, they will actually call the embassy to determine more or less what had occurred. And if you're found to be found that there's misrepresentation, they may bar you from Canada for 5 years. And that includes permanent residency as well. Now, study plans, a lot of people ask about study plans. Study plans may be mandatory, in some cases optional. Some missions put more value on the study plan. Other ones will assess the information on face value, your supporting documents. But really, if you are including a study plan, I would say probably leave it to about a page, 2 pages maximum, and indicate really why is it that you wish to go to Canada? What are your overall educational goals? How is this related to your career aspirations? Another thing too, visa officers sometimes ask is, what efforts have you made in your country of origin, and why Canada? And in particular, if there's English language studies being offered in your country, have you actually even taken any basic courses in English? And if you have not, they may ask, well, why have you not gone and taken any courses in your country when they're offered there? The other aspect is, and this is a really important one, is will the student leave Canada after authorized period of stay? And is there a history of compliance? So if you've been to other countries and you've not complied with this legislation, that would actually put a lot of weight. They would put a lot of weight on that, saying there's a history of non-compliance. But on the flip side, if you've gone and you've traveled around and there's a history of compliance, be sure to mention that you've complied with the rules and regulations of that country. And really what you're saying is that, why would I not then follow the rules and regulations for Canada? So they'll ask about, you should provide information on any other international studies or travel that you've had. Another thing too is to show the factors connecting factors that you have in your country of origin. So what's in your country of origin that would pull you back to that country upon completion of your program? So they sometimes mention connecting factors to Canada. So if there are very strong connecting factors to Canada, they may look at that and say, the factors in Canada are significantly stronger than their country of origin. So you sometimes see that they'll refuse on that basis, based on connecting factors. So as far as an example of a study plan, this is exactly the study plan annex that the mission in Abu Dhabi is expecting. And as you can say, 1-page study plan. So keep it short, to the point. Why is it that you want to come? What's your overall educational goal? They don't have the time to read a 10-page curriculum vitae, resume, and 10-page study plan. If you put too much information that really is not material, it doesn't really provide additional value, they may just simply refuse it because they don't have the time to review it all. In some cases, a medical examination may be required. If an individual is from a designated country and they're seeking to stay in Canada for 6 months or longer, they should go for a medical examination. Also, If an individual is seeking to work in certain sectors while they're studying in Canada, such as health sciences field or teaching, they will need to go for an immigration medical. Otherwise, it will be indicated on their permit that they're not able to work in these sectors. But in some cases, if you have the opportunity to do the upfront medical, that might be a good idea, because the more complete your application is, including a medical examination or a police clearance to show that you have no record, that just makes the decision that much easier for the visa or immigration officer. So the more complete your application is, in my opinion, the better it is. And then also, as I indicated before, be familiar with the country-specific requirements. Some countries, will ask you for more bank statements than others. So get really familiar with what those requirements are. So as far as proof of medical examination, what they're looking for is an e-medical report. So if you've gone for an upfront immigration medical exam, the panel physician should have provided you with an e-medical report, and that's what you would upload in the portal as proof. And it kind of looks like this. I mean, I've sanitized it a bit, of course, but it would include the individual's photo. It may be in color, it may be black and white. It'll have a barcode. And as you can see here, you may not have the results, but this is the report that's sent directly to the chief medical officer in Ottawa to make a determination as to whether or not the individual is medically inadmissible or not. And this is essentially what they will extract and link to your file to make the decision. As I mentioned, the background information is extremely important. So they'll ask questions such as, your health, whether you've had tuberculosis, or if you were ever in Canada, did you need more than just medication? Did you actually seek social or health services during the stay in Canada? But the number 2 is extremely important, whether you've ever remained beyond the validity of your status in Canada, or worked or attended school without authorization. The second question, have you ever been refused a visa or permit, denied entry, or ordered to leave Canada? A lot of people stop there. You got to keep reading, saying, or any other country. If you say no and you were refused a US visa, your chances of refusal are extremely high. And also, if you've ever applied to enter or remain in Canada, be sure to say yes as well. Don't take it for granted the officer knows who you are. And if you've been previously approved a visa, you would need to tell them that you've actually applied to Canada and entered Canada in the past. This is a topic here that is often spoken about a lot. What is proof of funds? Well, this is that important piece that I was even talking about in dealing with different clients, with different profiles, different backgrounds. Now, when we look at proof of funds and adequate means of support, one of the strongest proofs is actually paying your tuition in full. So if you've paid your tuition in full, at least it can show that you have the means to pay for your tuition. Ensure that you have the required months of bank statements. These can differ from one region to another. For example, Dakar will ask for 12 months of bank statements, whereas perhaps Kenya or Tanzania may ask for 6 months. If you have a supporter, it's usually stronger if this individual is related to you, father, mother. It's going to be stronger than if it's just a friend. And the other thing is, if you are submitting a letter of support with proof of funds from the supporter, provide the proof of relationship. How is this person related to you? You may want to provide copies of their birth certificates, we'll say your uncle, right, is supporting you. Well, how is the uncle support related to the student and the father? Well, you should provide birth certificates to show that they have the same parent, etc. Provide proof of relationship. Don't take it for granted that they're going to accept your information on face value. Provide a letter of support or affidavit of support. Provide proof of assets, property, business ownership, etc. Again, they don't really know who you are. So, provide bank statements, provide proof of ownership of other assets, investments. It could be stocks. It could be proof of employment, how much salary the supporter is making a year. And if mom and dad are both working and sending their child to Canada to study, both parents should provide proof of employment and funds. Another thing, some missions will even tell you, if you are showing large deposits of money without evidence as to where that money came from, they may consider that evidence not to be reliable. So we call this show money, and individuals who sometimes just throw in large deposits of money, those applications will be refused in some cases, especially if they don't know where the money came from. They may suspect that you really don't have the money and that you found some way of throwing a large amount of money in a bank account to essentially submit your application. Okay, yes, okay, applying for a visa. You may have clients or individuals who have a study permit, started studying in Canada, came back to their country of origin due to COVID. If they already have a study permit, it may be advisable to just apply for another study permit, even though, technically they have one and all they need is a visa. As you can see here, here's the difference here. I'm using Nigeria as an example. If you're applying for a visitor visa from Nigeria, that's 450 days. To the left, you can see visitor visa. If you're applying for a study permit, well, that's 7 weeks. So you can either have it sit in queue for 450 days, or, even if it was half a year, you're probably not going to make it in time to start your program of study. So pay real attention to what are the processing times for visas and study permits. Another thing too is when you're applying for a study permit, the focus is a little bit different, and the delegated decision maker may be actually even a little bit different, maybe a more experienced officer reviewing it. So take a look at that. But another comment I wanted to make as well, with COVID-19, processing times have been very unpredictable. They're not really processing things normally. And I think they try to provide accurate processing times, but I think what I've seen, what I've witnessed is that they've been very inconsistent. IRCC's been inconsistent due to COVID-19 and whatever impacts they're facing as a result of this pandemic. So I think what I'll do is I'll pass it over now to the questions.
Thank you, Jacques. That was great. And I know we have a lot of questions in there, a lot of questions that you've answered. I always learn something new when I'm listening to these presentations from you. So thank you. And I know, I just want to say thank you to everybody that's joined us as well. A lot of the questions have been around whether we're recording the session and whether we're sending this over. So yes, if you have signed up for this session with Jacques, the session is being recorded, and we will be sending that recording out to you. The recording will be live for a period of 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, that recording will end. So, please be aware of that, and I'll as well send that when we send out the recording. But if you've signed up for the session, obviously you're here. I know some of your staff members might have signed up and could not attend. You'll definitely be able to share that recording. Jacques, a lot of the questions you covered. One of the questions that I do want to maybe go back into is parents or family members coming with a student to study. So if a student is coming to study and a parent wants to come with to visit, or to spend a couple weeks getting the student ready, how does that work? How does a visa officer look at that, if you want to take that on?
So definitely, I mean, in many cases, we may be even talking about minor age children, individuals who are 17 years of age, who've completed a high school program, wanting to come to an institution in Canada, start their program. So really the way that it would work is that the parent would apply for a visa if they don't have one already. If they have one already, they'll need written authorization from the mission to accompany that dependent to Canada. Another component is it's very important if you have just one parent wanting to travel with a minor age child, that the other parent provide consent, parental consent to accompany the dependent to travel onwards to Canada. Now, I realize that, there may be 17 or 16, maybe not as important as quite a bit younger children, but it's something that they look at. They want to make sure that the other parent is okay with that child traveling to Canada to start their program of studies. Another thing as well is if the student is a minor age child, right, under the age of majority in that province, so it's the age of majority in the province, they may also require a declaration of custodianship. So if they need a declaration of custodianship as we'll call it an unaccompanied dependent. So even though mom and or dad are traveling to Canada, if they're remaining in Canada unaccompanied, the visa officer is going to want a declaration of custodianship. Now, the custodian in Canada must be either a permanent resident or Canadian citizen. It cannot be a temporary resident. And these forms, they need a form, need to be notarized. They need to be signed before a notary public. So the custodian needs to sign it before a notary public, and also the parents back in, the child's parents also need to sign and have this form notarized as well. So it's possible, but yes, you need to explain why you're seeking to travel with your child, and if it's only one of the parents, to include a letter of consent as well.
Awesome, thank you. The other question you covered, but we got a lot of questions again as you were covering it, was the finances. So you talked a little bit about finances, showing that you can pay for a year, I think is what you said, or at least for living costs. But then you said at one point, because I have a question here, about proving those funds and how long the money needs to be in that bank account and so on. So we have questions here about finances. What's a good financial record? What do they need to go with?
Yeah, I mean, bare minimum should be full payment of tuition, and a bare minimum of $12,000 for the student to pay for their basic living expenses. Now, they may be in a homestay environment. So if they're in a homestay environment, they should provide proof that they've paid for that homestay, if they're able to do so, or that accommodations have been made, if possible. So with money, more is always better than not enough. So it's really tough to answer that question because everybody is different, right? In one case, you may have an individual who's self-employed. Well, if that individual's self-employed and they're supporting their son or their daughter's education in Canada, well, they should at least provide a copy of their business registration. They should provide proof of funds for their business. If there are tax statements as well that they're able to provide to show essentially that they've paid their taxes, or to show proof of what money they've earned. This is that whole thing about where we deal with people differently. So visa officers look at that as well. Proof of funds may look different for one individual over the other. Somebody, for example, one parent may have more money in the stock market. So provide perhaps a report of your portfolio. What do you have in the way of stocks or investments? If you have thrown large amounts of money to pay for your child's education, provide proof of where you got that money. So for example, if somebody liquidated stocks to put that money into a bank account, I would provide a copy of that stock report to show the sale of the stock, to account or explain where that money came from. Because if you're just throwing a large amount of money in the account, they may really wonder, where did that money come from? Has it been legally obtained? Does that person really even have the money? And in some cases, they may ask you to provide proof of funds, And then later on, as they get closer to issuing the visa, they may say, can you give me an updated bank account? And if they see that money's been withdrawn, then you're in that whole potential area of questioning the credibility of the documentation. So another thing too is that if someone's working for somebody as a supporter, provide an employment letter. So if dad works for an important company, don't just say, well, I'm the manager of company ABC. Get an employment reference letter stating that, well, father works for ABC. He's been working there since such and such a date, and he earns 100,000 US per year. So you can kind of see, you need to look at that person and provide as much information as you can for proof of funds. Now, proof of funds, sometimes I get people asking me, if I own a car, should I include that? If I have a credit card, should I provide that as well? I don't think they put too much weight on that, like mobile assets, like your car and things like that, or a credit card, as they would other documents, such as a bank letter, bank statements, deeds of title for property ownership, business registrations, employment reference letters. So make it as strong as possible. I know it kind of seems a bit invasive. People sometimes hesitate. They don't want to provide too much information. But remember, if you don't provide enough, they may refuse your application. And the information is kept confidential. Pretty well what you provide to the Department of Immigration is confidential. They're not going to tell everybody how much money you have and where you got it. There are very strict rules on communication of information. So that information should remain confidential.
That's awesome. Thank you. The other question that we've gotten. So, by the way, for everybody on the chat, as we said when we sent this link out, we cannot answer specific student questions. There's about 300 people with us on the webinar this morning. So, I'm trying to sift through the questions here. But the other question that Jacques, you and I have talked about is, we've gotten a lot of this in the chat, is the refusal question. When they refuse because they're not satisfied, the applicant will come back. Give us a little bit of insight into that. How do they counteract that when they reapply? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a very important question, a very common question. For the most part, visa officers, immigration officers are kind of judge and jury. I kind of use that term because when they use the word satisfied, it's a subjective term. So I'll use an example. Let's just say we were in a restaurant and we ordered a meal and everything was identical. I may ask one person, how are you enjoying your meal? Well, I find I'm not really satisfied. My meal is a little bit too spicy. The other person may say, well, my meal is perfect. I love it. I'm satisfied. Another person may say, my meal is not spicy enough. So they use the word satisfied because it is a subjective term. There is no judge in the land that can direct somebody to say, no, you are satisfied, for example, with your meal, right? So it's a very, very subjective term. If the officer is not satisfied, the judge can't say, no, sir or madam, you are satisfied. No, the visa officer can say, no, I am not satisfied based on the information given to me. So it's a term, unless the notes or if there's a proof of bias, or if the refusal is done through an error in the administration of law, it's really tough. They can make an application for leave to the Federal Court of Canada, but remember, all they're doing is they're asking the federal court whether they're even willing to hear their case. And if they don't see a bias or an error in the administration of law, the federal court would say, sorry, application for leave is refused. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this. Making an application for leave to the federal court is a very expensive, time-consuming process. It would take a very long time to have it heard, and you would probably pay handsomely to actually have a lawyer present your case to the Federal Court of Canada. Now, what you may want to do is you may want to hire a professional to obtain an access to information request, to obtain a complete copy of case notes, to see what was the basis for the refusal, and have it analyzed by somebody who knows. Hire a professional, because sometimes a refusal letter doesn't really tell you everything. It doesn't really speak to what was the logic behind the refusal. So in many cases, resubmitting an application is probably the easiest way to have the application reconsidered. But before doing so, you may want to have it analyzed by a professional to see what was I missing. And I know when I have immigration consultations with clients, it's obvious. It would be like, oh, they're living in the Gulf, there was no Gulf visa. They had no proof of funds or insufficient proof of funds, or they were refused a US visa, so the officer questioned their credibility. So I guess this is what I'm saying is, you can always resubmit an application, but please don't have them question your credibility. Because the minute they think you're lying, then they kind of ask themselves, when are you lying and when are you telling me the truth? So that's kind of really the basis for that.
That's great. The other question that we got is, does program of study affect my visa application? If I'm studying a postgraduate program, if I'm studying at this university versus that university, does that affect the visa application at all?
I think it has to be logical. So, the study plan, the reason why you're attending that particular institution has to be logical. Now, the good news is most NAVITAS institutions, we're talking about younger individuals. And I would say that the refusal rate would climb with mature students. So I would say the older you are, perhaps the higher the refusal rate based on mature students. So if someone is going from high school and then attending a college or something like that, it's more logical. So the refusal rate is lower, but it also has to kind of make sense. Why is that person wanting to actually study that institution? And when we're talking about mature students, let's just say someone has a master's degree already, and they're wanting to pursue a certificate program. That may be illogical to the visa officer, saying, well, they have a master's degree. Why are you going for an inferior program in that field of study? So it would have to be explained. You'd have to explain, why is it that you're wanting to go there? So there may be, different methods that they're using. Like, I don't know, they could be like a physiotherapist, and then they want to kind of have an idea of, if it's a certificate program, are there different practices in Canada? Is that kind of why they're wanting to adopt that? More advanced, more progressive? So yeah, it must be logical. But I think really somebody, especially when we're talking about NAVITAS, when you're talking about somebody going from high school to a college program, university transfer program, that would be logical. So the refusal rate, if it's properly supported, should be significantly lower.
Wonderful. And one of the last questions that I'll go through here, and you talked about this just a little bit earlier, is those students that have studied during COVID-19. So they have a study permit, they studied online, maybe they've never even entered Canada because our programs have been online.
Right.
And that study permit had a time limit. Now they need to renew or extend their study permit. What happens there? What should we be looking out for, and how do our partners apply through that?
Okay. So the way, if you look at processing times, if they're applying for a visa, let's just say they have a study permit in hand, and then they decide, well, all I need is really a visa. If they're applying for a visa, their application may remain in queue for hundreds of days, potentially, because the officer has no idea that you're a student seeking to return to Canada with a visa. So this is why my suggestion is, if you have somebody like that, forget the visa. Really, a visa is a visa. It's just they're coded differently. A study permit will have an S1 visa, a work permit W1, a visitor visa V1. That's how they're coded differently. But if you put it as a study permit application, they will know that you're a student seeking to return to Canada with your visa to attend in-person classes. Now, if you're doing that, please provide, of course, an enrollment confirmation that you are enrolled and actively pursuing your program of studies. Also include a copy of your transcripts to show proof that you've complied with the requirements of your program of study, that you have been attending and actively pursuing your program of studies. And then include all supporting documentation like proof of funds, previous travel to Canada, your visa, all of that. So the more complete your application is, the more inclined the visa officer is going to say, yeah, everything's here, application approved. But if you're missing too much information, the officer is going to go, how do I know that you've actually been even attending school? And how do I know that when you came to Canada that you even attended a class? So that's why don't take it for granted that the visa officer knows who you are and what you've done. You need to provide proof. You need to provide supporting documentation to back up your story, whatever you've told the visa officer.
Wonderful. And I think that covers, as I said, we're not going to go into really deep detail. I know you've put up your phone number here and your Facebook and Instagram handles. And, you know, the question that we keep getting is, are we recording this? Yes, we're recording this. Yes, we will send you the recording and you can access it. I'm going to stop the recording now, and I do have a few other pieces that I do want to go through.